Good morning. My name is Anne-Marie McCaskill Davis, and I'm the Cultural Funding Specialist Senior with the City of Austin's Cultural Arts Division. Today is September 6th, 2024. We are getting ready to start the Thrive Elevate Review Panel for organizations or nonprofits. We are also joined by Maya Williams-Britton, who is our technical support staff person and is also part of the cultural funding team as a cultural funding specialist, as well as Surubi Kuke, who is our equity facilitator during this panel. So panelists have already reviewed all the applications prior to today. They've given preliminary scores as well as preliminary comments. During this panel discussion process, they have the ability to make changes to their scores and comments as they hear from other panelists. Each application has a maximum of 10 minutes. I'll be keeping the timer going for that to make sure we don't exceed the 10-minute maximum for any application. If we run into any technical issues, we'll stop the timer as well as stop the recording, and then we'll begin again once those technical issues have been resolved. We have instructed the panelists to not repeat comments that have already been said that they agree with, and have also encouraged them to share their thoughts if they do not agree with a comment that another panelist has shared or has a divergent opinion. And so because of this, we are not expecting panelists to score on consensus. So they are not trying to make sure that they all have the same score. They can all have their own opinions about each of the different applications. We've asked panelists to provide overall comments, and those comments should align with the review criteria set out in the scoring rubric, which has been made available to the public since the program launched on the Elevate and Thrive websites. They should not be basing any of their scores on information that is not a component of the scoring rubric. Things like financial need, for example, or geographical service area are not items that should be taken into consideration in scores. We have also instructed panelists to look beyond grantsmanship. They are also allowed to use firsthand experience if they have participated or seen material by the applicants presented. And they are also allowed to reference the applicants' websites as part of their review, but it was not a requirement of that panelist to do so. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, they will turn off their camera, turn off their mic, while the remaining panelists review the application. They will not come back to the dais until the scores have been finalized for that particular applicant. Let's see, I think that covers everything. One thing I do want to mention before we get started in earnest is that we have assigned all the applications, a primary or secondary reviewer. This does not mean that those are the only two people who have reviewed your application. What it means is that we have someone who has prepared to speak and introduce the application that they are presenting by talking about the applicant's mission and the activity that they have proposed in their application. And then the secondary is to ensure that we have some follow-up comments in addition to the primaries. All panelists have reviewed all applications assigned prior to today. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and get started with today's panel. The first application up for review is, let me pull that up, is Rancho Alegre. Elizabeth will be the primary on this application and Sam is the secondary. Paula has a conflict, so she's turned off her camera and her mic. Elizabeth, whenever you're ready, you can begin speaking. I have the timer set and I'll start the timer once you start speaking. So whenever you're ready.
All right. So in reviewing the application for Rancho Alegre, I thought that the key constituencies were really clear within like that first paragraph, as well as the history of service and, clearly identifying the community service goals, leadership roles and career development and all of that. Um, let's see. Cultural leadership as well was pretty, yeah, cultural leadership was well defined as well. Um, some of the things that I had a hard time finding in the application were related to the intersectionality question, because the specifics of the race, gender, class, et cetera, intersections were not mentioned. And then the other thing that I had a difficult time finding was under the accessibility portion. There was no mention of a specific, service providers. And let's see, there were a mention of specific services that they would provide, but no mention of a service provider. And yeah, I think, let's see. Also the goals for, moving towards cultural institution status were clearly laid out. So I think those were my only notes on that application. Overall, I think it was, clearly researched and it laid everything out to where I could find the information.
I second all of Elizabeth's comments. I felt in the accessibility section, the applicant could have provided more details on the specific services that they'll be providing. They mentioned that they'll have nurses at their events, but no more specialized accessibility services. So I thought the application could be improved by giving more writing to that. And then the question about cultural institution status, I felt the applicant only outlined sort of one goal, which was to become a subject matter expert and serve the community in that way. I felt the application, the prompt called for 2 to 3 goals per funding year. And I felt like the application could have provided more tangible goals to help them reach that status. But other than those 2 things, I agree with Elizabeth that it was an extremely strong application. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Lyra or Anna, do you have any feedback for this applicant?
I don't have anything new to add. I think Elizabeth and Sam pretty much covered it. I think their key constituency of Mexican American individuals and everything that they're doing related to music, and it aligns with the goal of this grant and having like a free public event related to this organization, I think would be a really interesting aspect of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Anna?
Yeah, I think same here. I feel like they kind of covered my comments. I would say, yeah, just a reiteration of the cultural institution status. I think maybe it could have had a little bit more clarity in that section for me, but besides that, yeah, agree with previous comments.
Super, thank you.
Okay, you may finalize your scores and just give me a thumbs up when you are all set. And Lyra and Elizabeth still working? Are you good? Okay, great. All right, let's move on to the next application. It's going to be Austin Emerging Arts Leaders. Anna is the primary, Elizabeth is the secondary. Paula, you may go ahead and come back to the dais. And before we get started, let me reset the timer. Okie doke. Anna, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the timer when you begin speaking.
Yeah, I'm reviewing Austin Emerging Arts Leaders. They requested $105,000 for mentorship programs, an annual showcase, and workshops for a broad array of different artists across Austin. I thought that the application did a really nice job of considering equity and speaking on their prioritization of marginalized communities and demonstrating how these communities will benefit from these activities. I will say that I think they clearly described their key constituencies, their creative mission, and proposed activities really well. I do believe, kind of upon investigation and inference for me, I think these activities kind of broadly speak to sort of the emerging art scene in Austin on the whole. So I think personally, I would have just liked to see a little bit more description in how equity is like the central focus of this programming. But yeah, I think just, yeah, kind of generally within the application, those were my notes.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really strong application. The only thing I thought was missing was again with the intersectionality portion, and specifically, you know, naming the intersectional individuals. This was more of a, we deal with intersectionality, but I think I was looking for specifics of how those intersectional identities are a part of the organization or a part of the key constituencies. But
Okay.
overall, this was a great application.
Great. Other thoughts?
I think that I found that the cultural activity section, I felt like it could have benefited from more details on what exactly, when these events would take place, how they structure their mentorship program. I felt like they described in broad strokes what they do, but I found I had more trouble connecting that to the budget once I was looking at the budget, because how many workshops will they be providing, et cetera, things like that would help connect their funding to the programming they do. That's just one thing I would like to add.
Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with the cultural activities as well. I thought it wasn't explained. I mean, there was a lot of words, but not a whole lot of content actually saying what they were going to do.
Okay. So it would benefit from more specificity. Okay. Any other feedback, Lara?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think overall the application was really strong. I think the application could be more specific also in the marketing section. I saw that the description had didn't have specific strategies for deeply engaging these groups. So just for marketing and the activity section, the answers were a little too broad. So just specific details would have been helpful.
Okay, great.
Okay. If there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. And then when you're all set, make sure to give me a thumbs up. Thank you. Anna. Thanks, Lyra. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next application, which is Texas Music Museum. Anna is the primary and Sam is the secondary. Paula has a conflict with this application, so please go ahead and turn off your mic and turn off your camera. And we'll invite you back here in a moment. The timer is all set. So Anna, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Yeah, the next application is Texas Music Museum. They're requesting an amount of $150,000 to support their three-part project, which is includes elements of preserving history, resisting erasure, and can you find the third one? Countering displacement. Yeah, I thought this was also a really strong application. They did a really good job of demonstrating how the applicant's mission and key constituencies have kind of evolved over time to specifically serve communities within the city's funding priorities. I felt that they made that really clear in the key constituency field and in their history of service. Let me see what else. I would have liked, I think, to see a little bit more description in the proposed activities. I think it could have benefited, especially in part one of the three-part project. I feel like it was, I think this person, I would have liked to see a little bit more description in how equity is centered in that part of the proposal. I think it was more clear to me in parts 1 and 2, or 2 and 3. But in part 1, I would have liked to see a little bit more description in the cultural activities section. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to this. It's a great application, really strong. I guess I want to just uplift that. I really enjoyed in their cultural activities section 2, having they spent the time to consider like who would be running some of these programs and matching them with people with strong lived experience connected to the populations that the programs wanted to serve. So I really felt like that was an impressive work on part of the organization. And I also felt like the organization has really clear goals for continuing their journey towards cultural institution status as outlined by the city. I felt like their goals were really clear, really well outlined, really actionable, and aligned with the budget. Yeah, great, strong.
Great. Other thoughts?
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Serby.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Elizabeth, Ryan, and Lyra,
Okay.
no other thoughts. You don't have to repeat anything that you've heard. Just wanted to confirm that you don't have anything to add. Okay.
Okay, please go ahead and finalize your scores. And is everyone ready to go? Okay, great. Let's see, we'll move on to Austin Intercultural Network. Lyra is the primary, Elizabeth is the secondary. Paula also has a conflict with this one. So as soon as she comes off turns off her camera, great. Let me reset the timer. Okay, Lyra, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
So this application is Austin Intercultural Network. I think the strength of this application was really comprehensive planning, and there was a clear action plan and very diverse programming. I saw that the application was very strong in demonstrating that their artistic vision and their mission are deeply rooted in serving communities that are at immediate risk of cultural erasure and displacement. So African American, Latinx, immigrant population. Another strength of this application was how detailed the examples were of how they directly improve access to opportunities within these communities. So social services, cultural education. I think it was a very strong commitment to inclusivity and cultural preservation. Marketing plan was also quite strong. I think the proposed activity does show strong effort in promoting equity and inclusivity, but I think just having more details on how these events will benefit these marginalized groups would have been helpful, just explicitly mentioning that. Another little comment that I had was about the budget. It seemed that they were over budget for, or they were over budget, or that's what, I just wasn't sure if there was an explanation in the application for whether or not they were asking for additional funds, or so just clarity around that would have been helpful.
Yeah, I second Lyra in that overall the application was really strong in detailing, the programming that they've laid out to serve their constituencies. The only thing that kind of stood out to me was, or that I would have liked to see, is a specific mention of the cultural backgrounds of the leaders in the organization. And I think that's pretty much it.
Any other thoughts?
Okay, you may go ahead and finalize your scores. Hey, everyone, all set? Great. And then Lyra, just let me know if you're ready. Oh, okay, great. The next application, and Paula, you may go ahead, come back. Welcome back. We are going to review Austin Sister Cities International. Sam is the primary and Lyra is the secondary. Let me reset the timer. Okay, Sam, whenever you're ready, you may begin. I'll start the timer when you begin speaking.
This applicant is seeking funding for a festival that promotes cultural understanding and opportunities between Austin and a series of sister cities. And it engages populations inside of Austin who are reflective of those sister cities, as well as the larger Austin community, and puts on a festival. And they're seeking funding for that. I felt as though the application, I did not explicitly call out the City of Austin's priority funding groups populations, but I was able to infer in the application that the organization engages immigrant communities and populations from these sister cities. So I felt as though the application could have benefited from more detail on how their activities explicitly support or engage the city's priority funding groups. And I felt like I had to do a little digging to get to that information. In addition, In addition, I think the application, the leadership of the organization, only some of the leadership possessed deeply rooted cultural understanding and or lived experience within their listed key constituencies. So I felt like tying the leadership back into the constituencies they're serving would improve the application a little bit. In terms of accessibility, I think the application provides a large budget line item for these activities, but doesn't provide information on the contractor or who they might be hiring to fulfill these services. So they provide a really comprehensive list of accessibility services they'll provide, but I think a plan, outlining a plan that they have would improve the organization, would improve the application a little bit. And for the budget, I think there was maybe I think line 4 looked incorrectly and entered. And as I said about the accessibility services, there's a very large line item for it and a really comprehensive plan. But I think the application could benefit from doing telling us who they might engage for those services. I think they have strong cultural institution goals. But overall, I think the application really needed to focus in a bit more on how their proposed activity serves the City of Austin's priority funding groups. I felt like more detail given on that would help improve.
I'm actually in total agreement with Sam, so I'll try to be as concise as possible, so I'm not repeating anything. I think the application was really interesting because it's promoting cultural diversity and equity. But I felt like the specific focus on key constituencies was less explicitly addressed. There was a mention of LGBTQIA, but I struggled to find that LGBTQIA was the main group that would be benefiting from this activity. I also felt like the majority of the leadership may not have direct lived-in experiences. So that's a little point there. With the budget, I did see some inconsistencies. Overall, I felt like the budget was quite broad. The amount allocated for accessibility seemed unusually high. So I think it would just be helpful to have a detailed breakdown of why that was allocated, just so that all expenses feel justified and well supported. That's it.
I'd like to add something to that. I agree everything that's been said, and also about the budget. They're asking 80,000, and the event is a festival to promote Japanese culture, but there's only 15,000 allocated to actually artists, and 5,000 of those are for traveling artists coming from Japan. So it just seems like a very little portion of the grant is actually going to artists, which is the whole purpose of the festival. That was something that I noticed a lot, going to administrative things and things like that. Some things sounding like too much budget going to certain things and not enough to the artists.
Thank you for lifting that up. Remuneration is a really important aspect of equity when it comes to not just underserved communities, but sometimes underappreciated cultural producers like artists. Yeah. Anna or Elizabeth, any feedback? Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry. I feel like I resonate with everything that's been said. And then I just wanted to kind of add, I think for me personally, the intersectionality section, intersectional identities were listed or were, I feel like, mentioned that they are included in the festival and the planning. But I think I could have just benefited from maybe a little bit more description or detail on how those intersectional identities are like helping to shape the event itself. Again, they are, it was mentioned that they were involved or like part of the, part of the planning committee, but I feel like the identities themselves kind of had to be inferred, or just how they actually shaped the event. I would have liked to see a little bit more detail in that section as well.
Mm-hmm. So showing participation of direct, like communities that you're trying to serve. Yeah, engagement. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other comments, you may finalize your scores. Paula, Anna, and Elizabeth, are y'all all set with scores or still working? Okay, great. Let's go ahead and move on to the next application. Dance Waterloo. Elizabeth is the primary, Sam is the secondary. Anna has a conflict of interest, so she'll be turning off her camera and her mic. I will invite her back once scores have been finalized. Timer is all ready to go. So Elizabeth, when you begin speaking, I'll start the timer.
All right, so I am reviewing the application for Dance Waterloo. I think this application had a really good grasp on the cultural leadership, the history of service, and then especially the artistic goals. I thought it was very helpful how they laid out specific programs for each constituency group. I found that really, really well developed. For the cultural institution status question, I felt as though it didn't give specifics on how they are planning to reach that status. The answer seemed just a bit vague. I think I would have liked to see like specific steps for each year, especially, and how they plan to build on that. Because I felt like the answer sort of summed up the whole application without providing like the specifics of like, in year one, this is what we plan to do. In year two, this is what we plan to do, and have the budget reflected in that. But overall, I just thought it was really well thought out, especially, like I said, with the constituencies.
Yeah, I really appreciated their cultural programming, the cultural activities, and the outreach that they'll be doing to support those. I felt as though the organization, its mission is not explicitly rooted in serving the priority funding groups that the city outlines. However, the application does a pretty good job at saying that for this project, they'll be focused on serving those groups. So I felt like that distinction was, I was able to sort of glean through the application, and that they're serving mostly populations that are not at immediate risk of cultural erasure or displacement, but have experienced sort of institutional marginalization and underfunding, and that the more displacement or erasure population groups that are at immediate risk of that are served, but it's not the explicit mission of the programming that they're proposing. And in terms of the lived experience of cultural leadership, they're sort of, the makeup is more broad. But other than that, I agree with almost all of Elizabeth's points. and I thought that their cultural institution answer was really strong as well. I think those are all my thoughts.
Great, thank you. Other feedback? Paula or Lyra? Remember, these are great opportunities to share different opinions as well as agreement. Okay.
Okay, you may finalize your scores. All right, this brings us to our first break of the day. We're running just a touch early, which is great. We will take a 15-minute break, so we'll be back at 10:53 now that it's 10:38. All right, so you can go ahead and turn your screens off, make sure your mics are muted, and we'll be back at 10:53. Okay, Okay, the next application up for review is Tejano music and other Latin cultural music. Anna is the primary, Elizabeth is the secondary. I have the timer all set to go. So Anna, whenever you're ready, you may begin. I'll start the timer as you begin speaking.
Hi, yeah. So I'm reviewing Tejano music and other Latin cultural music. They're requesting $143,000 for a gala, a showcase, and 1 to 3 other concerts kind of throughout the year, featuring Tejano and other Latin music genres. I thought that the organization did a fantastic job of describing their mission and their history. I thought that they just described very clearly how they've served the city's key constituency groups. I thought that was really strong in the application. I feel like there were a couple specific fields that could have benefited from a little bit more description and detail. I think particularly in fields such as intersectionality, accessibility, and language accessibility. I think in these sections, I just had to look at other portions of the application to kind of infer this information. And I think just these sections could have been a little bit stronger in terms of like in those actual answers, including the information that I was seeking. But yes, overall, a really strong application. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
I would second Anna in, the fact that overall it's a very strong application. Specifically like the mention of the cultural activities, how they said we're going to do a gala and then a showcase and then like the concerts. And then that was reflected well in the budget. The only thing I would have liked to see more of is the on the accessibility portion, specifically mentioning which service providers and which trained professionals would be on site during the events to, serve those particular constituencies.
Thanks. Other feedback on this application?
I agree with
Just
the other panelists about how strong the application was. I thought there could have been a bit more explanation or detail in the marketing section, including specifics of how they'll do outreach rather than just listing that they will do outreach. I think nailing all of the goals of the city, they do hit those, but more detail could be provided to show that they have a plan to do that.
I also thought it was a very strong application. And I agree with the intersectionality that could be a little more specific. And also the accessibility question as well.
I do want to encourage panelists to share where, if and when budgets don't reflect goals like accessibility goals, because that is an important equity question. Like, are you putting money for these things like interpreters or other accessibility accommodations? So just wanted to lift that up. I don't know, I don't know this particular application, but to keep that in your mind as you're analyzing or scoring.
I like the fact that in this budget, they allocated quite a bit of money to performers, which I think is, and musicians, which I think is what's so important because, well, anyway, it seems to be a rare thing in applications, you know.
To pay artists well.
Yeah, it seems like most of the money always go to the administrative and maybe marketing, but it's like, how about the performance, the whole point of actually making the event, you know?
It's a very important equity question, yes. Any other thoughts?
I was just going to throw in just a point of clarification. Looking at this budget, they do have accessibility resources, some funds allocated to that. And then in terms of the scoring rubric and how payments to artists come into play, payments can go. We encourage payments both to artists and administrators, both, or one or the other. Ideally, paying people is what we want to see in these grant programs. But Paula's note is well taken. Okay, if there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. Okay, and everyone's ready. So Anna's thumbs up. Great. Elizabeth, you're all set, or you're still going? Okay, great. Thank you. All right, the next application up for review is Austin Iranian Professionals Association, or AIPA. Anna is the primary and Lyra is the secondary. Paula has a conflict of interest, so her camera is off and her mic is off. We will invite her to return once scores have been finalized for this application. The timer is set and ready to go. So Anna, whenever you're ready to begin, you may, and I'll start the timer when you begin speaking.
Great, yeah. I'm reviewing Austin Iranian Professionals. They applied for an amount of $150,000. They are hosting 4 traditional events over the course of the year. And their mission, I feel like, clearly serves their 2 constituencies. I feel like this application was really clear in the way it presented all of its information. I feel like their mission and history of service were really nicely described, and I feel like fall within the city's funding priorities. I think for me, feedback would be maybe that in the intersectionality field, I think the applicant made it really clear that it's deeply considered within their programming, but they didn't really address how intersectionality is kind of integrated into the specific events and activities that they proposed within this application. And so I think maybe a little bit more specificity or tying those 2 together would have been helpful for me to see. I think another thing that would have been nice to see within the cultural activities was maybe specifying locations for each activity. If they kind of went in and said like a hotel or a park, and I think it would have been helpful and would have maybe strengthened the application to see like a plan for where those were going to occur. within the city. Yeah, those are my comments.
I do agree with everything Anna said. I really enjoyed reading this application. They had a really good breakdown for the budget, their key constituencies, history of service. I really, it was interesting to learn that this is the only Persian organization in Austin. I think one area of curiosity / concern was the cultural activity section. I didn't find explicit information on whether these activities that they were hosting, New Year celebration, Persian festival, Mid-March festival, like are these events that are like normally part of the culture and they would do these regardless of whether or not they have funds, or would these events be possible only because of the funds of this grant or any other grant? I think just having explicit information on that would have been helpful. But other than that, I think it was a very strong application and really enjoyed reading what they had to say.
Any other thoughts, Sam or Elizabeth?
Yeah, I also thought it was a really strong application as I was reading through it. I just thought, the programming that they had proposed was really interesting and dynamic.
I agree. I think it was a strong application. And one area I noticed that a discrepancy between the budget and the programming is they have a goal to have some community engagement workshops, things like that. But it seems like the budget was mostly for their performance events. So I thought more detail could be put into how they would be budgeting for their non-big events for the years if they're listed. But I got a clear understanding of how the cultural programming works. I don't think I don't think I had the same questions as Lyra about that. I felt it was strong.
Fun.
Okay, if there are no additional questions, please go ahead and finalize your scores. And just give me a quick thumbs up when you're ready. Great. Awesome. All right, let's go on to the next application. Paula, you can come back to the dais. Book Boosters, a celebration of children's books, storytelling, and art is next. Lyra is the primary and Paula is the secondary. Let me reset the timer. Okay, Lyra, whenever you're ready, you may begin. I'll start the timer as soon as you begin speaking.
Awesome. So Book Boosters was founded in 1987 to create, publish, promote, sell, and distribute children's books featuring people of color as main characters. I thought this application had a strong alignment with their mission of serving communities of color through impactful storytelling. I thought that their application did show dedication to their key constituencies, including people of color, low-income families, children who face barriers in the publishing industry. I really liked their idea, their cultural activity of offering free story time programs and having popular lunch and learn events at the museum. with that being said, I felt that the application got less specific and less explicit as it went on. So the proposal mentions intersectionality, but doesn't specify how these diverse identities are included in the activities or how they shape the programs. I saw that there was a mention of ADA access, but there was no clear plan for implementation of these services. Again, it does mention marketing platforms and a plan, but specific details on reaching these audiences was lacking. I was making the assumption that because they've been in they've been here for a while, so maybe they already have a background and a platform, and people already know about what they're doing. But I think just having more explicit information would have made this application stronger, because what they're doing is really important work. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I think the application started really strong because it's definitely the people we want to serve, that the city of Austin want to serve. But as it went along, intersectionality, accessibility, language, and marketing, and also the budget, because the proposed activity seems to be one concert, well, one story time program free to the public at the Carver Museum. At least that's, I read that several times, and seems like that's what they're proposing. And the budget really doesn't seem to reflect that. First, I think they asking for 244,000. So I think they put 2 years together there, and only 15,000 for artists, and a lot for, again, administrative, and some for marketing, even though they say they always get for free. Anyway, and they put some money for translators for productions, but they don't mention that during the application. So part of the application was really strong, and part of the application was like, where's all this money going to? I don't understand.
And I'm going to jump in here just to do a point of clarification. So the total budget, at least when applying for Thrive, can include the activities that they propose, but also can include the other expenses related to whatever their capacity building, organizational development, cultural institution status plans and goals. Those all can be included in the budget. It does look like there is a budget total error on this application because some of the numerical entries in that column have a $sign, which is then interpreted by the submittable software as a word rather than a numeric value. And so it's not actually totaling the whole amount correctly. So it does say that the total requested is $24,400, but there's definitely more than that listed. And I haven't gone through and done a manual calculation yet. But I imagine it's probably closer to the 150 maximum request amount, which is fine. This is not the only application that I've seen that has had that error. So that if it's miscalculating the total, it isn't necessarily something that needs to be taken into consideration because it's a system error.
Yeah, and I noticed that
yeah.
happened in other applications too. So that wasn't what the most concerned to me was, anyway, what I said.
Yeah, no, and I think your comments are completely valid, and having, making sure that there's a good connection between what is presented in the narrative and how it's reflected in the budget is important, and that's what we ask for in terms of scoring the budget for sure as part of the rubric. I just wanted to make sure that all the panelists were aware of the calculation error that is happening for some of these applications.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Okay, any other feedback on this application?
Yeah, I think just in terms of accessibility and language accessibility, I think it was kind of briefly mentioned that more specificity was desired. I think I just wanted to reiterate for myself that I think the piece that I was missing in those places was just the inclusion of trained professionals or just kind of a plan for implementation in those fields. I think again for both accessibility and language accessibility, just a little bit more detail in that regard, I think would have been helpful for me to just have a clearer picture of how they're going to implement those services within their events. Yeah.
Great insights. Thank you so much. If there are no other comments, please finalize your scores.
And has everyone finalized their scores? Are we still working? Thank you. And Paula, are you set? Are you still working on updating your scores? Okay, great. Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next application. Austin Oita Sister Cities Committee. Sam is the primary, Lyra is the secondary. Give me one moment to set the timer. Okay. And then Sam, whenever you're ready, you may begin. Oh, you're muted. Just
Gonna happen at least once. The application promotes cultural understanding and cross-cultural exchange between the city of Austin and the city of Oita in Japan. And they put on a festival at the Lawn Center every year and do some exchanges by welcoming Japanese citizens of Oita to Austin and sending some Austin folks to Japan. So I felt that this application in its key constituencies and history of service, that as written, it's a little broad, and they don't seem to be prioritizing populations that are at risk of cultural displacement or erasure, or populations that experience maybe other forms of institutional marginalization or underfunding. I was able to infer a little bit that they were perhaps serving underfunded or institutionally marginalized populations, but the application could have been more explicit at calling out the ways in which their programming serves those populations and how it's embedded into their mission and history. I felt as though they do in their history do a fair amount of programming that addresses different populations in Austin. In terms of cultural leadership, only some of the leadership share a deep-rooted cultural understanding with the underserved populations that I'm inferring that they're serving. Their event, I felt like the description of their event was very strong. It serves both their underserved populations, but also provides an avenue of learning and cultural understanding for a larger population. So they could have spent more time articulating how they're prioritizing some of their key constituencies. In terms of the intersectionality question, I felt like it's sort of only partially embedded into the organizational structure and the programming. It's not embedded, but I think more detail and thought could have been put into the way intersectionality affects their programming and their organization as a whole. In terms of accessibility and language accessibility, I felt as though the applicant was relying on their host organization. They don't provide any plans of their own for how they will plan to make either their event accessible or their organization more accessible. Language accessibility and other accessibilities are pretty much by request only. I think the organization could spend some more time thinking about how they want accessibility to be a part of their mission structure and ways in which they could do that to engage more populations. Their marketing plan, they don't make any specific attempts to reach new audiences within the city's key priorities. And they set aside a lot of money for marketing, but don't provide any specifics on what firm they'll hire or what their plan is for that. And there's some discrepancies. They're asking for, I think, an Elevate amount of money, but responding to the Thrive application. So I felt like maybe there's a bit of budget discrepancy there. They have a lot of excellent goals for becoming a cultural institution, but they're not all reflected in the budget. And I think maybe that has to do with their misunderstanding of the budget. So I think in overall, more consideration given to accessibility and how to engage priority key constituents that the city is interested in serving will, as well as making their event more intersectional, will help strengthen this application.
Yeah, this application for me seemed a little bit more about cultural promotion and awareness and exchange rather than addressing key constituencies that are at risk of cultural erasure. I loved all of their activities and events and education sessions, all centered around Japanese culture. But specificity was lacking. I thought that the accessibility measures were good, but it seemed like that they were relying on the venue's staff for these accommodations rather than having a dedicated team member in their organization. So I think just a more focused, intentional approach would be important for an event like this, especially if the event is funded by the city. I did think that their marketing plan was strong, but again, it was too broad. It could have benefited from a clearer and a more specific plan for accessibility and marketing. I think their history of service, again, the main focus was cultural awareness, educational growth, and economic development. So just more specific evidence in history of service and future activities for how it's directly addressing cultural erasure and displacement would have made this application much, much stronger. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think to speak to the budget, just kind of being reflective of the things that people have been saying already. I feel like there's much more money like allocated for paying artists coming in from out of Austin than there is, like, it seems, for like funding allocated for local artists. Which is not inherently bad, but just within the city's like funding priorities, I feel like really prioritizing the funding and payment of local artists and local constituents, I feel like would make this application stronger, in my opinion.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said.
Okay. Super.
And just a point of clarification, funds can be used to bring in more for the audience members, but funds can be used to bring in artists from out of town. And out of our international artists are also included in that as well. Any other final comments or thoughts? Okay, go ahead and finalize your scores. Is everyone all set? Great. All right, up next is Acapella, Texas. Let's see. Elizabeth is the primary, Sam is the secondary. Elizabeth, whenever you're ready, you may begin and I'll start the timer.
All right, so I am reviewing the grant for Acapella, Texas. They're applying for a Thrive grant. And overall, I thought, the application was strong in the areas of, what particular activities they have planned for the grant funding and their plan for the cultural institution status. I didn't find that the application prioritized constituencies that are at risk of cultural displacement or erasure. Nor did I find that, there was specific cultural leadership in that portion of the application. They described the leadership team and what they do, not necessarily their cultural backgrounds and how that relates to their constituencies. And so I think I would have liked to see, specifically those things addressed, especially, what groups they're looking to serve. I know that they mentioned groups that would be participating in some of these activities that were, let's see, that had different lived experiences. But as far as the organization itself, I didn't see those things being prioritized. Let's see. Also with the language accessibility portion, I felt like it addressed, more so like having the concerts being in Spanish, but not necessarily, the marketing and how they're going to be accessible to groups that are non-English speaking, as far as, the programming and, like I said, the marketing and getting the word out. So those are my notes about this application.
Yeah, I agree with everything Elizabeth said. I don't think the organization has a goal of serving any of the populations that are prioritized by the city, either at risk of cultural displacement or erasure, or having experienced other forms of underfunding or marginalization. And I don't know if the applicant had given a lot of thought to how to engage those populations, either especially organizationally. I think there's some thought been given to how to make their cultural programming more diverse and perhaps serve other populations. But as an organization, I think they could give more thought to how they might grow as an organization to include more populations that have they've not served in the past. But otherwise, I agree with all of those notes.
Excellent, thank you. Other feedback from any of the other panelists?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a little note that, again, I agree with everything that was said, but there was a little portion in the application that showed that inclusivity and diversity was more of a recent development and was not central to the organization's founding. So even though intersectionality, inclusion, accessibility, all those sections were really strong in the application, I think if their focus was more broad initially when the organization was founded, and now it's more it's more geared towards the key constituencies that are at risk of cultural displacement. I think some deep thought and intentionality around that would have made this application much stronger. Yeah, I would add that.
Thank you. Excellent. You're muted, Anne Marie.
Thank you. If there aren't any other comments, you may finalize your scores. Okay, is everyone all set? Right. Excellent, thank you. All right, let's move on to the next application. Professionals. Anna is the primary, Elizabeth is the secondary. Let me reset the timer real quickly. All right, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Yeah, I'm reviewing the professionals. They've requested $132,005 for the production of the 3rd and 4th annual Crown Act Festival. Which is a celebration of the passing of the landmark legislation that protects against fair discrimination in schools, workplaces, and housing. And then they're also requesting funding for the stage play entitled The Depressed Therapist. Yeah, overall, I thought this application was incredibly strong. I feel like they made it really clear that their key constituencies and their mission and their history of service is really rooted in supporting and uplifting marginalized communities in Austin. Again, I thought that was really clear and really strong. It was a great application. I think the only areas where I feel like it could have been improved, at least for me, was that I think the intended venue of both proposed activities, I think would have just made it a little bit stronger, that specificity. And then I would have, I think, liked to see more description regarding the actual production of the play, The Depressed Therapist. I feel as though they did a great job describing the plot of the play and kind of the intended effect and exposure it was intending to provide, but it was kind of lacking detail in like the actual like production and the timeline of how this play would be created and produced. But overall, a really strong and awesome application.
Yeah, I agree with Anna. Overall, a really strong application. The only issue I had, like Anna, was the venue. And I know that in the last answer, in the cultural institution answer, they mentioned, you know, seeking out Texas Performing Arts for venue space and rental space. And so I think, you know, that portion could be a little bit more, I guess, ironed out as far as like, you know, the budget part. But other than that, I feel like a great application.
Okay. Other feedback?
I also thought it was a very strong application. I really appreciate all of, I know that we're kind of at the end of this section again. I appreciate all of your attention to these many layers of analysis, thinking about the purpose of the grant, our equity concerns, as well as management. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no additional comments, you may go ahead and finalize your scores. this was the last application for our morning session. So this leads us into our lunch break. So we will pause until 1 o'clock. So a nice long extended break for you all. I did want to mention real quickly before we take a break, because I didn't mention this in our executive session, but we'll do a brief debrief for panelists after our final review at the end of today. So once we get there, what I'll ask you all to do is just sign out of the Zoom session and then log right back in using the same link. And we'll do a debrief and as a brief little survey of the process with you all. But wanted to give y'all that heads up before we get there. So if you finalize your scores, we'll go ahead and take a break until 1 o'clock. We'll see. All right, welcome back from our lunch break. I'm going to cover what I covered earlier this morning, just for those folks who are joining us this afternoon and weren't here earlier to hear what instructions have been provided to the panelists. I am Anne-Marie McCaskill Davis, the Cultural Funding Specialist Senior with the City of Austin's Cultural Arts Division. Our technical support staff member is Maya Williams-Britton. She's also a Cultural Funding Specialist with the Cultural Arts Division. And then we also have our equity facilitator, Sarubi Kuke, who will be helping guide our conversations today. So the panelists have all reviewed applications and given preliminary scores and comments prior to today. They have the ability to change their scores today if they hear something from another panelist that makes them reconsider what they've preliminarily scored. Each application will have a maximum of 10 minutes for us to discuss. I will be keeping the time for that. I will stop the recording if we run into any technical issues, as well as the timer, and then we'll start back up once we get that technical issue resolved, if there are any. Panelists have been instructed not to repeat comments that they agree with if another panelist has brought something up. However, we're not scoring on consensus, so we do highly encourage panelists, if they have divergent opinions or thoughts, to bring those up with the panel. We've asked the panelists to not provide a numeric score announcement during their panel discussions of applications, and that they should really keep their comments directly tied to the scoring rubric. That scoring rubric has been on our website since we launched the program for both Thrive and Elevate. We've also instructed the panelists to look beyond grantsmanship as much as possible. They are also allowed to take into consideration their own firsthand experience with any of these applications and the content that they found on the applicant's website. However, it's not required for them to take those things into consideration, but they may if they so choose. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, we'll have them recuse from the panel review by turning off their camera and their mics. And we will invite them back once all the other panelists have finalized their scores. And to that end, we will go ahead and begin the panel. All right, so let's go on to the next application. Veteran Suicide Prevention Channel and the Austin Veterans Arts Festival. Lyra is the primary, Paula is the secondary. Lyra, whenever you're ready, you may begin. I have the timer ready to go, and I'll start it once you begin speaking.
Awesome. Thank you, Anne-Marie. So this organization, Veterans Suicide Prevention Channel, is an organization that is deeply committed to serving veterans, and they provide concrete examples of how the organization has improved access to opportunities over time for their key constituencies. Their proposal describes a festival, Ava Fest, which is a month-long festival featuring a variety of artistic disciplines and events. The application also has a very strong intersectionality section, which is the core aspect of the event. So women, veterans, LGBTQIA, and other diverse group of people. I don't remember LGBTQIA being mentioned as one of their key constituencies in the initial part of the application, but it is mentioned here. With all that being said, I did want to point out that the focus of this organization is on veterans, military personnel, and their families addressing mental health issues. I would love some insight from the panelists about whether this aligns with, I know that this aligns with serving communities that have experienced significant challenges and marginalization, but not necessarily cultural erasure or displacement. So that's just something that I want to point out and would love to get insights on. Lastly, wanted to mention that they do have a marketing plan, but they could benefit from having a more robust plan or a more robust strategy. They also mentioned creation of a studio and expansion of their services. So just having a detailed roadmap for how they would achieve these goals would have made this application much stronger.
Yes, I agree with what you said, and I mean, going with what we learned that the city of Austin is looking for with this grant, it seemed like this application is more trying to serve the community broadly. As long as they're veterans, which is a great thing, but maybe not for this particular application. The cultural leadership, I like that part, seem to go along with what we're looking for as in terms of key constituencies and intersectionality too. However, the accessibility, language accessibility and disability were lacking. They're really not saying anything specific that they're providing in that sense. And it's funny because you go to the budget and they are allocating $6,000 for language and accessibility. However, in the application, they didn't specify anything that they intend to do concrete. So that's one thing I wanted to add there.
Great, thank you. Important to keep looking at the budget alignments with the proposed activities. Any other thoughts from other panelists?
Yeah, I was going to speak on the marketing response. I think that they outlined like a bunch of the platforms and like seem to have a pretty like thought out and extensive marketing plan. But I think just in terms of the audiences they're engaging with, I think that marketing plan seems like very geared towards the organization's key constituencies and just kind of like the broad public as a whole, which is great. But I think it would have strengthened the application a little bit to see specific like marketing targeted towards the city's key constituencies and some of those other marketing groups just like specified within the rubric. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other additional final comments? All right, go ahead and finalize your scores. Great. All right, if everyone's ready, just let me know if you need another minute. And Anna, are you all set? Great. Okay. So the next application up for review is Dance and Jazzy. Sam is the primary and Lyra is the secondary. Let me reset the timer. Okay, Sam, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Vincent Jazzy. So the application, the applicant is an organization that has a long history of providing dance classes to populations that are the city's priority key constituents. So populations that are at risk of immediate cultural displacement or erasure. They have a long documented history of serving these populations. They do dance classes, summer camps. They have a celebration of Black history. So I found the application had really strong answers to key constituencies, history of service, cultural leadership. I felt like they really understood the funding priorities of the city, and as an organization, they meet them. So in that way, I think it's a really strong application. I think a couple of areas they can improve on are in accessibility. In both responses for accessibility and language accessibility, the applicant provides some details on how their public performances can be made more accessible, but doesn't address how they as an organization are looking at accessibility inside of their programming and trying to reach more constituents as participants that maybe have different access needs. So I felt like more thought could be given into how to create a more accessible organization holistically rather than just in your performances. Their marketing plan didn't mention attempting to reach audiences with disabilities or non-native, non-English native audiences or tourists, which were two markets that the city was interested in having the applicants address. And I felt as though the budget could have used a little bit more detail and be a bit more reflective of the application. I think it was just, there's no marketing budget, there's no money considered for marketing. Marketing is sort of included on line 11, capital capacity building expenses. And I felt like there could be more detail onto how they're going to allocate those funds. Additionally, one of their partnerships is with the STEM organization, and I would have appreciated more detail on how they are going to work with that organization. It looks like in the budget there, a lot of the money is going to that organization, and so I wondered how that I could have used more detail on that. But I felt like they had great strong rates for paying artists and educators, really strong mission and a really strong history of mission. And I think that with just like a little bit more detail, it would strengthen the application, but overall very strong.
Yeah, I strongly agree with everything Sam mentioned about this application. I think the application overall was really strong. It was really interesting. I think using dance as a tool for empowerment, cultural expression is extremely relevant. I saw that the application from its founding history has explicitly served their key constituencies and has consistently focused on education, accessibility, and community support. The application explicitly mentions integrating different intersectional identities and how their activities are well crafted to be holistic and empowering and multifaceted. It was really interesting to see that they are considering sensory friendly options. So overall, I think it was a very strong application. One little ancillary thing that I think they could focus on was maybe more actionable steps for institution status. As I was reading it, I got the idea that it was more like hopeful ideation of like, this is what we hope to do. So a little bit more actionable more actionable steps would have made this application stronger in that little section. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Any other feedback?
I'm just gonna mention that I've noticed in many applications, including this one, that applicants are kind of confusing the accessibility with the language accessibility. So a lot of them are putting American Sign Language on the language accessibility, but that's should be on the other question. That would be okay if they provided the language accessibility, but in this case, they're not providing any language or interpreting services. The American, just the American Sign Language, which would be in the disabilities part.
It's a yes and, I think, because American Sign Language is a language in and of itself, and it aids in accessibility. So I think it is considered providing language accessibility. I don't know, maybe actually, Anne-Marie, if you want to speak more specifically to that.
Yeah, we would consider ASL interpretation can be listed in both the accessibility section as well as in the language accessibility, because as Surubi mentioned just a moment ago, American Sign Language is a non-English language. It seems a little counterintuitive, but it is not structured in the same way that English language is structured, and so it is separate and apart from that. So we can account that in both sections.
Yeah, my point wasn't that. I mean, I understand that, but it's just that you still have to provide, at least according to the application says, you still have to provide non-English speaking communities with something. And if you're just providing the American Sign Language, it doesn't cover both questions. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, I suppose that could be an interpretation, but I am saying as part of the rubric that it can be counted in both sections. It may be. It is allowed.
So if you don't provide non-speaking English, they still get the full score. Is that what you're saying?
They would receive the full score if they are including all of the components that are asked for in the rubric for the language
Right.
accessibility services. So they would need to provide a name of they would have to be providing a professional level of service, including a professional service provider, and describing a detailed plan of implementing that. So they would need to have all of those additional things. Just naming a language that they're serving would not necessarily be a sufficient response in order to get full points for that answer.
I don't know. I'm still confusing with the question number 7, language accessibility, at least because that's how I scored every application. It didn't matter where they put the ASL, that didn't matter to me. I didn't take points out of that. But if they only provided that, at least according to the rubric that I'm reading, to me, it was talking to non-English speaking communities. So that's pretty confusing to me.
Yeah, I think the point is the people who only use ESL are also non-English speakers.
Okay.
That which is different than, for instance, immigrant communities, certainly. But I think we're talking about language accessibility in an equal way, like that anybody who doesn't use spoken English is a non-English speaker. Does that hit it? Is that correct, Anne-Marie?
Yes.
Okay.
We have 1 minute left. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, you may finalize your scores. And everyone all set for the next application? Great. great. Paula, are you ready? All right, great. Next is Gallery ATX. Elizabeth is the primary and Sam is the secondary. Whenever you're ready, you may begin.
All right, so this is for the Gallery ATX. Looking through their application, I thought that overall it was a very strong application. You know, they hit a lot of the points that were in the rubric to be addressed. And so I don't really have much except for the specific leadership, which isn't mentioned like in their grants answer, but it is on their website. All the board members are on their website. But yeah, the proposed activities are like really clearly detailed within the proposal. And then like the budget clearly defines like how they plan to move forward from a primarily volunteer-run organization to something that can support 2 full-time positions. The only kind of discrepancy I saw with the budget and the goals was that they have a plan to get a brick and mortar location, but I didn't see where that was represented in their budget breakdown. But other than that, I thought it was a really, really strong application.
I felt like this application could have benefited from more detail in a lot of places that would have helped strengthen it. I felt like the application could have drawn maybe more connections between how like pop-up markets center or like our activities that center equity, I guess. I felt like the cultural activities I wanted more detail around like how, other than providing a space of commerce in that way, the organization centers equity. So I wondered what I would have appreciated more detail on how the organization supports artists in other ways. And if there's a fee structure for their pop-ups or more details about how they run that. I felt as though like in general, like more details and would help the application like sort of explain how intersectionality informs their processes as an organization and their activities. Like more details there could have helped. I agree that their like long-term goal or their goal to add staff, full-time staff is really strong, but I didn't see it reflected in the budget anywhere. And additionally, I felt I wondered like if their goals were rooted in financial stability, and I wonder if thinking about their organization and how they can deepen their relationship to their key constituents. How are they serving them other than via a market and a zine? I felt like more details on that would have helped for me. Yeah.
Great. That's really concrete. Thank you. Any other feedback for this applicant? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, let me double check my notes, but I think I had a note. Oh yeah, under the very first section where they describe their mission and organization, I feel like I would have like benefited from seeing a more specific designation of the key constituencies. I feel like they listed like a lot of different people that they serve, like their audience and their participants, but I think and they outline it later in the application, like these people are our key constituencies later on. But I think having that answer in that exact field of like our key constituencies are like clearly defined to these groups of individuals, I think would have made things a little bit more clear for me as I was reading it and trying to define who exactly this organization, is serving. So I think that would have been helpful for me. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
All right, if there aren't any additional comments, you may finalize your scores. Okay. Everyone ready to move on? Great. The next application up for review is COTFG. Anna is the primary and Elizabeth is the secondary. I have the timer ready to roll. So whenever you begin speaking, I'll start.
So I'm reviewing COTFG, or Church of the Friendly Ghost. They're requesting $150,000 for kind of like a 4-part series of events. They're hosting a synthesis workshop series, an improvisation workshop, panel discussion and performance series, new media art and sound summit, and a collaborative immersive technology project. These are just basically providing various development, connection, and performance opportunities for underserved artists. I thought this was a really strong application. I think that they did a great job of outlining how their history of service and their mission is really dedicated to supporting underserved communities in Austin. I think let me hold this up, but I believe sorry. 1 second, I lost my place. Let's see. I think I particularly appreciated that they have a certain percentage of people that they're trying to employ from underserved communities. I think that really strengthened their application and demonstrated their commitment to equity to me. I believe that they clarify on their website that they have like a 60% minimum of commissioned artists coming from underserved communities. So it's a really strong point for me. I think that's what I have to say about that application.
Yeah, I thought it was really well put together as far as the marketing portion, and then the goals that they have are really well reflected within the budget. Under the cultural activities, it's not really clear how the key constituencies are involved in the development of those activities. So I would have liked to see specifically how, the constituencies help to contribute to the activities. But other than that, really well done.
Great. Any other feedback?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to say that their cultural institution status section was really strong. I think they had a comprehensive strategy for relaunching and expanding programming and enhancing the capacity of the organization and having like sustainable growth over the next 2 years. So just really strong section there.
I guess I just want to make a note that I said, I visited several links and saw, read very little to no evidence that their key constituency are the ones we look for in this application. Now I don't, it's been a while back, but so I guess to me, there was a discrepancy between what they say on the application and what I saw in real life.
Good to notice.
Yeah, I
And
noticed, sorry, go on.
I just said thank you. Go on.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I noticed that a little bit too, that in the key constituency section, or the one after that, those details were not explicitly mentioned, but the details that were missing in those sections were mentioned in the later portion of the application. So here I see that the application does include information about educating, reaffirming, and continuing the legacy of marginalized artists, particularly those that are at risk of erasure and displacement. So that portion, I had to do a little bit of digging there, but I think it was all there.
Yeah, I agree with Lyra. I didn't struggle with that. I mean, you have to, I think their work sample as well helped, and their website was sparse, but I also was able to do the digging within the application. Didn't run into that same problem.
And just for the video clarification or just point, panelists are allowed to visit the applicant's website to do additional research and to find supporting materials relating to the questions within the application.
Okay.
All right, if there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. All right. Everyone all set? Great. Sam, you're good to go? Or are you still working? Okay, great. We'll move on to the next application, Broad Theater. Paula is the primary and Anna is the secondary. Paula, the timer is all set. So whenever you begin speaking, I will start the timer.
Yeah, so this is application from Broad Theater, their company, the creative missions to deliver provocative theater experiences written by and for people of marginalized genders. I thought it was a very strong application, definitely one of the constituents that the city of Austin is trying to reach. The history of service was very clear to me. Also cultural leadership, I thought they were very detailed in everything. The cultural activities was great, the way they specified everything for their 2025 season. That was all very clear. To me, it was a very clear application to understand and read. Didn't seem like they were trying to hide anything. Also, intersectionality. The one thing that I had trouble with, but now I have to rethink from what you ladies said, was the accessibility, the two questions with accessibility, the 6th and the 7th, because to me they were separate and they had to provide for both questions. But now I have to rethink, because they did mention American Sign Language, but nothing for non-English speaking people. And I know that American Sign Language can also be for non-English speaking persons, but I thought we were treating them differently for the application, and it's not. So that was the only thing that I didn't see much concern about not bilingual, like in the marketing as well. There's nothing that's mentioned that to reach bilingual communities. That was the only thing to me that was kind of sticky. But other than that, I thought it was a very strong application.
Yeah, I also thought this was a really strong application. I feel they did a great job of describing their current mission, their history of service, and cultural activities. I feel like they'll have lasting benefits for the city's key constituencies. I will say, kind of within my perception of the application, it appears to me that the organization's founding mission has kind of evolved over time, or has evolved over a short period of time to serve these key constituencies. I think I saw in the application somewhere that their initial mission was to tell stories by and for women specifically, but now it's kind of broadened to serve the city's key constituencies as well. So I did notice that. And then I did want to see a little bit more detail in fields such as marketing. I believe they have a really extensive marketing plan going on, but there wasn't a specifically described target towards some of the other audience members that were outlisted in the rubric. I feel such as individuals with disabilities or non-English speaking communities. Yeah, I feel like there didn't, at least to me, I would have liked to see more detail regarding their specific marketing strategies towards those communities. But overall, a really strong application and some great proposed activities.
Excellent. Any other thoughts?
I thought that under accessibility, there were no real plans to make the space accessible and have, professionals provide accessibility services. It was more focused on live streaming the performances as opposed to providing in-person accessibility. I think the addition of that within their application would have strengthened that particular section.
Okay, if there are no additional comments that folks would like to share, you may finalize your comment or finalize your scores and your comments. Both. Finalize both of those things. All right, if everyone is all set, we'll move on to the next application. Up next is Lubeate. Lyra is the primary and Paula is the secondary. Lyra, whenever you're ready, I have the timer ready to go, so you may begin. I'll start the timer whenever you begin speaking.
So this application, Lupe Arte, I thought was a very strong application, aligned very well with this grant's objectives. They address the disparities in the art industry and they provide a platform for diverse voices in the arts. Their proposed cultural activity is the Mex American, which is a free annual comic convention that celebrates Mexican American and Latinx comic creators. Through workshops and contests and live music. I think that's a great idea. Sounds like a great event, something that would enrich the culture of the city and would be a spotlight for these key constituencies. I saw that the organization shows a clear commitment to serving these constituencies who are at risk for erasure and displacement. Some feedback would be that the accessibility section could benefit from having more precise detail or clarification, and it just seemed like the question was not fully addressed in their answer. Another concern for me was that um, the budget section was a little too broad, or just a couple sections were broad in the budget section. So for instance, they assorted 43K for marketing, and that would be a well-justified expense, but just providing a more detailed explanation for what different marketing things they plan to do would have been beneficial and good to know. I did look at the marketing section, but that number was not addressed. So I think just revisiting these sections will make this application much stronger and would help us understand the details better. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, picking up on that figure, the 43K. I mean, the proposed event is one free comic convention at the MAC. I understand just one day. And looking also at the marketing, it just doesn't seem, it seems way, way high of a figure for what is proposed here. Although I did think it was a strong application in a lot of other points. But they, in the marketing section, they give a lot of emphasis to their website and development of their website. I noticed that. And also points the accessibility. They say that they will not provide any. They say here they don't have any activities proposed at this time to provide any kind of accessibility. And also the language, they say they will provide volunteers, bilingual instructors and interpretation service, but all on a volunteer basis or the sign language upon request. So those to me were the weakest points on the application.
Yeah, I agree with the two panelists who've spoken. I think there was some disclarity around the cultural events for me as well, which I think we've hinted at about like what exactly they're applying with, whether it's the convention, which doesn't seem to be reflected in their budget at all. The budget seems to be for their other programming. And so I felt like there wasn't a strong connection between the budget and their cultural activities in general, and more clarity on exactly what they're proposing. I think it's there, but I don't think it was explained enough to understand how to read the budget in light of the cultural activities, which speaks only about one major event and then hints at some other programming they do. I felt like that could use more specificity.
Okay. Great feedback. Any other thoughts?
All right. If there's no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to the next application. It is Kala Darpan Austin. Sam is the primary and Lyra is the secondary. Let's see, maybe make sure that the timer is updated here. Okay, Sam, whenever you're ready, you may begin. You're muted.
Twice. This applicant's not supports promoting and preserving Indian classical arts. They have a great history of service and a strong mission that is aligned with the city's funding goals. Their cultural leadership is made up of people with a deeply rooted cultural understanding of their mission. And they have a strong outline of cultural activities. I think they could have spent more time explaining the season of programming and connecting it back to their budget. I felt like there was some disclarity there. For example, there's explaining maybe what their events are that are not their concerts. There's some line items that aren't in the budget that aren't mentioned in the cultural activity section or other sections. So I think painting like a more detailed picture of everything to help the budget make sense. And then I think in the cultural activity section, more information could be given on how their key constituencies are involved in the events and what those desired outcomes are for them. In intersectionality, I think that the application doesn't really address how race, class, and gender are at play in their mission and programming. So I think more detail could be provided there. Their language accessibility is a focus mostly on printed materials. And so I wondered if they could provide some expanded content on how to create a more accessible programming for their in-person concerts, workshops, and other events. In the marketing section, I think there's not a lot of detail given on how to reach new audiences within the city's key constituencies or audiences with disabilities for whom English isn't a primary language. And then I think the budget, it's not fully reflective of the application, as I've said before. So yeah, like are they going to do workshops, or what do they need trophies and certificates for? I think if they could provide more detail on like what all these things are for, what accessibility services are they going to have, and outline those in the accessibility section. I think all of that would help strengthen the application. So I think a little bit more clarity on the programming will also like help that organization writ large. So I think that's are my main notes, but otherwise very strong.
Yes, I agree with Sam. There were parts of this application that were quite strong and other parts of the application that could benefit from like more specificity, more clarity, just more like deep thought around what the proposal is. So this organization is focused on providing platform for upcoming Indian and Indian American artists, which does address the lack of equity, but it felt like there is a slightly stronger emphasis placed on other forms of institutional marginalization rather than those that are at immediate risk. I really liked that the organization is led by individuals who do have a strong passion for the Indian classical arts, and they're actively involved in the community. I think the cultural activity, yes, it does focus on equity, and there is an intention to serve a marginalized group of people, but it does not fully align with the criteria of the grant. For accessibility, it's lacking a clear plan for implementation or having trained professionals or yeah, just a lack of strategic plan there. For the cultural status, I think, again, the response could have been more specific. It could have been stronger. It could have been more measurable. I see that the intentions are well described, but it's not fully laid out. And it's not super concrete. So just having a more concrete roadmap and more strategies and just having more information would have made this application much stronger.
You. Any other feedback?
I actually liked the budget. Thought it was well made. Reflected of the application. The cultural activities didn't bother me the way they explained it. I guess I'd like more clarity. This is not considered one of the key constituents of Austin, City of Austin.
I believe they are included in the listing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the reason maybe why your colleagues may have mentioned it that way is when we think about the history of Austin, like historically excluded, marginalized, or more importantly, at risk of erasure and displacement are in reality, if we're thinking in terms of racial disparities, are Black and Latinx communities because of what we know is happening in the city. So I think there is a closer look at ensuring not just representation, but actual equitable distribution of resources that to elevate programming and activities by and for communities who are immediately at risk of displacement, whereas South Asian communities are immigrant communities and may be excluded in some ways, but are not at risk of erasure or displacement at the moment. I think that's
Okay. So that's how we need.
If I didn't say it correctly for any of you, I don't want to speak for you as panelists, but that's what I interpreted in your analysis. Okay. Do you have anything you wanted to say, Paula?
No, I was just trying to understand if because I actually agree with you, but I thought we were supposed to go with what the city said, which I thought included this community, but maybe we can be a little more.
Well, if you remember in the training for the panelists, we had all these videos and different ways of understanding the history of Austin and what led to displacement and erasure of communities. And there are different ways that different communities are erased, made invisible, or silenced. It is true. And we're just holding some relative balance, I think, all the time, when we're thinking about these realities. Mm-hmm. We have 2 minutes. That's lots of time if there's more conversation on this. Go ahead, Sam. Oh.
Clicking that button incorrectly.
Picking up incorrectly. I love it. Okay, great.
All right. Go ahead and finalize your scores. All right, that has led us to our next 15-minute break. So let's just call it be back at 2:10. And we'll get started again with Shakti Moves Dance Company. See you back here in about 15 minutes. Okay. We will be reviewing Shakti Moves Dance Company. Let's see. Elizabeth is the primary and Sam is the secondary. The timer is all set to go. So Elizabeth, when you're ready, you may begin and I'll start the timer when you begin speaking.
Okay, I'm reviewing Shakti Moves dance company. Looking through the application, I saw that it was really clear who their constituencies were, their history of service, and then the primary leadership in the company. So those things, are very clearly laid out, as well as the budget. The thing that was not clear was how intersectional identities are involved in the program creation. It was clear how they're involved in, I guess, like the actual programming, but I was reading through the paragraph, and it wasn't really clear to me. But that was the only thing that really stood out. Yeah, that was the only thing that stood out for me within their application that could have been a little stronger.
I struggled in this application to identify key constituencies that they were serving that aligned with the city's, the city's priorities. Didn't seem like they were focused on serving communities that were at risk of cultural displacement or erasure, or that had been institutionally marginalized or underfunded. There was some addressing of that in their specific cultural activities and the project they were looking to undergo, but I didn't see, I could have used more detail in the application into how the organization from its founding serves these communities, how the history of service is. So I see there's some mentions to LGBTQ plus communities, but there's no other mention of any other population that the city is interested in funding or giving priority to. So that I think the application could use more detail on. I'm not sure, I agree with Elizabeth that the intersectional, their answer to the sort of intersectionality question felt a little broad and maybe not focused enough on what intersectionality means and how it's being applied here in this case. Didn't seem to be relevant in some ways. Accessibility wise, it didn't seem to have any specialized services for access. They only would be using ADA compliant spaces, which are not considered a specialized service. And I think their marketing plan could use more detail. There wasn't much consideration given to reaching new audiences within the city's priority constituencies or audience members with disabilities or for whom English is not their primary language. Yes, those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. Other thoughts? Paula, Anna, Lyra?
I agree with the constituents thing. I was struggling to find what we're looking for in the application.
Yeah, I would agree with everyone. I thought their intersectionality section was really strong, and it does mention some key constituencies there, but it does not seem like that is the focus of their application. I think mentioning that maybe in the earlier part of the section would have been helpful if that is their focus. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Great, thanks. This really encourages us to think about the difference between diversity and equity and how we put our attention and our money towards different things, or show it through our budgets and our plans.
All right. If there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. Okay, is everyone ready to move on? Great. All right, next we have up Innovative Arts Conservatory Foundation, or IAF or CF. Anna is the primary and Elizabeth is the secondary. I have the timer pulled up and it's ready to go. So whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Hey, yeah, I'm reviewing Innovative Arts Conservatory Foundations. They've requested $150,000 for the support kind of three main projects, which are the Expression Summer Intensive. It's a musical theater intensive leading to a production of Fame Junior, and annual performances in collaboration with Ballet Afrique and Delirium Entertainment, and Fate's Black Film Festival featuring local and national filmmakers. I thought the organization, this was a really strong application to me in that the description of their mission and their proposed activities and their history of service was very clear and easy to read and outline. I believe that their history of service demonstrates a commitment to supporting organizations that are historically underserved. I think ways for me that this application could have been strengthened are really in relating to the cultural activities section. I believe they described their events well, but I think I would have liked to see how equity was centralized in their programming, and particularly in their cultural activities such as the Expression Summer Intensive. I think it was clear what the event was and what was going on, but I think for me, it seemed to kind of serve the community broadly as a whole. And I think, yeah, I could have just used like a little more detail and clarity on how underserved communities were really involved in the like development and production of those events. Yeah, I feel like could have just been strengthened by a little bit more detail in that area.
Yes, I thought the activity portion and what they were describing, was pretty clear. But I would have liked to seen how those things were reflected within the last portion of the application, where they detail their year one goals and year two goals. I found that the goals outside of the programming were pretty vague, like the seeking additional funding, and like community involvement and community feedback. I would have liked to see more specific, goals relating to that. And then once again, like relating that back to their budget breakdown. The other portion I feel like could have been improved was the intersectionality portion. It wasn't clear to me that intersectionality was a part of the programming as far as the development. I think inclusion was there, but it was kind of like broad statements about complexities of identity rather than stating, those specific identities, and how the particular programming, like the Fade to Black Film Festival, would serve those identities. Let's see. Yeah, I think those were the things that stood out to me.
Great, thank you. Any other feedback on this?
I thought it was a really strong application.
I think I agree that it was a strong application. I think one area of more detail that they could have used was in the key constituency section. I think they say sort of what Elizabeth was saying about intersectionality. They state broadly that they're seeking to serve, and then they list all of the city's priority funding groups, but don't list populations or exactly who it is that they serve. And I was able to like figure out what populations they serve, looking at their like materials and their website and stuff. But they could make it more, they could punch it more in that first paragraph and then save and just like say right then and there like what it is they're doing, because they're already doing really good work. So I think to like it would prevent the panelists from having to dig, and just naming their key constituencies instead of hinting at them, I think will strengthen the application.
Great.
Yeah, that is true. That takes some digging sometimes, and to validate what they're saying. I guess ideally we wouldn't have to dig, but
Okay, if there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. Okay, if everyone's ready, anybody need more time to finalize their scores? All good to go? Great. Next up is Superwoman Records. Lyra is the, oh, I'm sorry, no, Paula is the primary. Anna is the secondary. Paula, whenever you're ready, you may begin. Paula, you're muted.
yeah. So Superwoman Records, the key constituencies are Black women and gender expensive music artists, marginalized in Austin and the music industry. So I think that's a very strong key constituent for us. They also show, okay, so here's something that I had a little trouble with, although I thought it was a very strong application. And it shows a lot of history of service, but related to Kat, who is the brains behind the whole thing. My question about the history, I actually made a note here, is because the particular Superwoman Records got started in 2024. So Kat officially launched Superwoman Records in 2024. So I was a bit confused because the application has the name of Superwoman Records. And as I understand, it has to be, for Thrive, has to be in existence for 5 years. And this is started this year. So I was wondering if they can actually be eligible for Thrive or not.
Yeah, so for Thrive, they have to be, they do not have to have their nonprofit status for 5 years, but they can be doing the work for 5 years or in operation. And so I believe in this case, and there may be some other applicants who are similar, their nonprofit status is new, but they've been doing the work. that the nonprofit organization is ultimately doing for at least 5 years.
Okay. The cultural activity, so it's interesting because it's a record label. So they do propose one festival, but the bulk of the funding seems to be to give the $5,000 stipend to each artist, which they describe pretty well. I think they could have described the event that is open to the public a little better. They didn't say much about that. I like the intersectionality. I think they show very clearly that that's a very important part of the organization. Accessibility also, they were very, very specific about translators, ASL translators, and in all activities, but of course, the activities are a lot one-on-one, except for the festival. They do provide interpreters. They say they will provide interpreters for the festival. The marketing, it's all okay. The budget, we always come back to the budget. It seems like, I don't know, it seems a little wonky in relation to what they're actually proposing, because the $5,000 stipend for each artist, from what I understand, that's it, you know. They don't pay extra for marketing, extra for this or that. So I was a little confused about the budget. It's not bad. I was just, I think it could be in the culture activity explanation, it could be explained better what all the marketing and all that actually is going into. But overall, I think it's definitely the constituents that we are trying to help. The city of Austin is trying to support.
Yeah, I felt like this was a really strong application to me, particularly with the identification of the key constituency groups and the way that this organization is intending to support them financially. I thought was fantastic. I also thought that the intersectionality section was really clear as well. I feel like this really falls within the city's like funding priorities. I think I agree with Paula and the clarification of some of the cultural activities. Particularly, just wanted to specify that the SWR, the Superwoman Records Festival, it was just kind of missing a few clarifying details, like the location and the date. I think that would have just like strengthened the proposed activities a little bit more if we had been able to like see that information like clearly intended and outlined. I think as well, just like one line in the budget that I think I was getting like a little stuck on / had a question about was it was like from the budget, it looked as though the applicant intended to spend more than $2,000 on equipment purchases for this, like in the capital building expenses section. Just line item of the budget, it was a little bit like, yeah, seemed over allocated in that section to me. But besides that, they have really strong application and seems like they're doing really nice work. So.
And just to provide a quick point of clarification there in terms of the budget, at least for capital expenses, Thrive recipients are allowed to spend funds on equipment purchases, and the individual purchase can be up to $2,000 and requires staff approval. And so if this applicant were selected as a Thrive recipient, we would work through the pre-contract process to make sure that the individual items that they're thinking of purchasing are within the right scope of what's eligible. and to get all those pre-approvals. I just wanted to throw that out there as just a clarifying point that that would be something we would review in the contracting step.
Okay, any other feedback on this application? No? Okay.
All right, you may finalize your scores. And we're going to move on to, is everyone done finalizing their scores? Okay, great. Teatro Vivo, Lyra is the primary, Paula is the secondary. I have the timer all set and ready to go. So whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the timer.
Okay, so this application is Teatro Vivo, and their mission is centered on producing culturally relevant Latino theater and supports the uplifting of marginalized communities, including Indigenous groups of people, and by offering accessible programming, supporting emerging artists, and addressing social issues. This application was slightly confusing to me, and I will explain why. Like, there were parts of this application that explicitly mentions that their key constituency is the general population, but there are parts of this application where they do show that they have a strong history of service for Latinx and other underserved groups. So I'm presuming that there might have been some confusion about what key constituencies mean. Maybe they're trying to say that their audience is the general population, since there is an audience aspect to the event. So I would say for a higher, for a stronger application, just explicitly mention how they're addressing the community that are at immediate risk of erasure. In the leadership section, I think specific details about how the majority of the leadership is rooted in or has direct lived in experience with the key constituencies was also lacking. Intersectionality section was really strong. I think the proposal was very, very detailed. I really enjoyed reading about the 4 productions that they are planning on doing. I think the activities would address cultural erasure and celebrate traditions and support artists who are underserved, which would be a strong commitment to equity. I think the budget was logical to me. I think the only confusion was around about the key constituencies, and I think just some thought around that or some explicit mention of that would have made this application much, much stronger.
Yes. Yes, I think this is one of the applications that definitely took a lot more digging, going to the website and really to find out, okay, who is the cultural leadership here, and which ones are the constituents. They could have been definitely more specific, because we're not required to do digging. So if we don't do the digging, they will miss out. So always be very specific about those things on the application. Other than that, I thought it was a strong application.
Great advice. Thank you. Other reflections?
Okay, seeing that there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores and we'll move on to our final application of the day. Is everyone ready to roll? Okay. Oh, I'll wait for Lyra. Okay, great. All right, the last application for today is on boardroom. Sam is the primary and Lyra is the secondary. Let me reset the timer really quickly. All right, Sam, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the timer.
Great. This applicant on boredom serves individuals with or without disabilities, provides access to opportunities for individuals with disabilities, and employs local artists. And they are have 3 really clearly outlined cultural activities. I thought that was really strong. I think the organization has a really strong and well-documented history of service, a really strong and well-documented understanding of their key constituents and their creative mission. I think for the purposes of this application, saying their key constituents are artists with and without disabilities and non-artists with or without disabilities is for this funding opportunity, but I think I was able to understand what the organization does and who they're and how they serve their key constituents. I felt they had really strong plans for accessibility and language accessibility, and really well-documented history of service. Their cultural leadership, it seemed that not all the leadership belongs to the organization's key constituents, but that most of them have a connection in some ways to those key constituents. Intersectionality, I thought was very well thought out and well considered. They had a very thorough marketing plan. I thought their goals for becoming a cultural institution, to me, felt like they could use a bit more work and to be more reflective in the budget. They have year 1 goals. One of the year 1 goals is expanding admin resources. And I think one of their goals as growing as an institution was to like expand, but under their budget, their payments are, there's a large payment to their executive director, and which is under artists, which I thought maybe belonged under admin support. But then under admin support, there's another line item for more hours, which would also go to the executive director to perform that admin support. So, or a hired assistant. So I felt like an institution that's interested in scaling up, they might not be have thought out what that scaling up might look like or have it reflected in the budget. But otherwise, I thought it was a really thorough and strong application. And yes, I believe that those are my thoughts. Oh, I'm sorry. The other, I think it sort of goes back to cultural institution status, which is the operational structure of the organization. It's sort of a 1-person show, so which also made me think that if the organization is looking to become a cultural institution and to scale up, that there is not a plan there, at least as it reflected in the budget, or with detail into doing that in a way that I would encourage more detail in that. Okay, not bad.
All the sounds. I would agree with Sam. I do think the application was really strong. The budget was, it felt like, yes, it was a little bit all over the place. So just some clarity around that would have been helpful. But outside of that, I think the application was really strong. Really, like their mission of serving artists with and without disabilities. I think their leadership was strongly aligned with the key constituencies. For the cultural activity, I did think they had a comprehensive lineup of events. They had a bunch of different kinds of events, so diversity there and variety there. Accessibility section was also really strong. I think the intersectionality and inclusion section, I could see that a lot of diverse voices in the communities would be benefited, but it doesn't clearly describe how they would be involved from the very start. So I guess that would be my feedback on that. I think the language accessibility was also a very strong section. They have listed some names, so it seems like they have given some thought around that aspect. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Excellent, okay. Any other feedback? I know it's the last one and we're kind of tapped out, but
I
anything?
want to mention that, yeah, I mean, it's a good application, but perhaps not for this grant, because it seems to wanna serve the population broadly, people with and without disabilities. So that's kind of how I interpreted that. And also, yeah, the budget, it seems like one person, yeah, was named there and is in two different boxes. It just seems very, I don't know. I didn't understand that. So that was a red flag, a big red flag to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just one last comment from myself. On this application, I thought that it was pretty strong, and I think the applicant really demonstrated the history of service really well. I just feel like during in the cultural activities section, all of the activities were really well outlined and like displayed like the curator and which I thought was really strong, except for the last two activities. I think activities 6 and 7 in the 7 listed. I feel like those were a little bit more vague to me and like lacked detail, like location and date, and even just like selection and like curation and how those were going to occur for those. So I think I would have just liked to see a little bit more detail in those two activities that were listed. But yeah.
Okay. Overall specificity, getting detailed, teasing out some of, not allowing assumptions to lead, or making it easier for reviewers not to have to dig. I think we've gotten some great guidance for applicants in the future. Any last thoughts before we finalize scores?
Just
Please.
that I know how hard it is to
Yes, it
to make
is.
a grant application. I'm very scared of it, so I congratulate everyone for taking that step.
Yes. Thank you for lifting that up. It takes a lot of effort and care to make each application happen. So gratitude to each applicant for trying.
Okay. If there are no further comments, you may finalize your scores. As mentioned just before the lunch break, we'll exit out of this session for the panelists to go back into just a post panel review debrief. Should be about 15 minutes or less. So if you'll just close out of this Zoom window and then use the same exact link and join again, we'll do a quick debrief.
Thank you.
Thank you.